So next up, we have a talk from Cansu Canca. She was one of the panelists yesterday. She is the founder and director of the AI Ethics Lab, and she also has a PhD in philosophy. So I'd like to bring up Cansu right now. Give her a round of applause. Enjoy.
Thanks. So I will be talking about ethical AI, which is something that we are talking about so much recently that it seems like we've been talking about it for ages. That's not really the case. For the longest time, ethics of AI or AI ethics has been only something that is of interest of a handful of philosophers, computer scientists, and sci-fi authors, basically. Only recently, the public started caring about it, and I can be even more specific. So this is the worldwide Google search trends for the past 5 years of the term AI ethics. You can try different versions, ethical AI, ethics in AI, and you will get more or less the same trend. Basically, until 2016, when you said AI ethics, you would just get blank stares. People wouldn't know what you're talking about. Then things started changing in late 2017. And that is when we started having scandals. And these are just a few of the major scandals. There is a whole larger map out there if you search for it. And the thing is, these scandals started bringing home the message that technology and AI is not free from ethics. It's not ethics neutral. On the contrary, all of these ethical problems are really woven into the phases of building an AI system. So from the research to design, development, deployment, updating, marketing, all of them have different ethical questions. And some of these ethical scandals are about social media and its effects on politics, democracy. Some of them are about premature collaborations between companies, tech companies, and militaries and law enforcement. And some about safety and security and privacy, and how AI systems categorize us into who gets to get the job, who gets the loan, financial loan, and who gets to the jail. And I mean, if you realize this is a problem for all of us. So even if you are a developer or you are a lead at the tech company, you're not just a creator of AI systems. You're always also subject to AI systems, other AI systems that you're not creating. So even if you are building them, you are always being categorized by the systems that others are building. So we have to have some sort of solution to these problems. And the solution has been coming in the form of, so this is another timeline that sort of matches the last one that I showed. Basically, 3 types of solutions have been proposed. One is early stage regulations in AI ethics. The other one is AI boards. So many companies are now building AI ethics boards. And the other one is AI principles, whole bunch of AI principles. So we have right now a little over 80 sets of AI principles coming from private companies, institutions, international organizations, governmental agencies. And all of these efforts, we can sort of categorize them into two approaches. So one is enforcing ethics. How do we enforce ethics? And the other one is integrating ethics. To enforce ethics, we need external regulations. So there is a very important function of the regulations and laws, which is to make sure that we at least have the boundaries of what is ethically acceptable and not acceptable. So this is also very important because if you want certain companies or certain developers to care about ethics, you also want to make sure that you don't force them to compete with those who don't care. You want to make sure at least there is some sort of fair playing field. But the problem with the regulations is that they can never be very detailed. So they are not going to answer your everyday ethics questions. They are just going to be general guidelines. And when you think about, if you take an example of how the ethical questions arise while you're developing an AI system, you really realize that, yes, there's a very important function of regulations, but it's just not enough. So think about, for example, developing a personalized AI personalized system for advice in healthy living. So it's sort of like an AI health coach. There will be, as you are developing something like this, and this is an example, by the way, that was brought to us so that we work on the ethical issues of this. So it's not a hypothetical, completely speaking. So there will be many ethically loaded questions. So what data are you gonna, so think about it like a variable. It's gonna basically understand your health and will give you the right health advice, healthy living advice. So there will be many questions that you have to answer as you're building this, many ethically loaded questions. What data are you going to collect? Are you going to only track the user's physical data, like a Fitbit? Or are you going to log into their Instagram? Are you going to have access to their Instagram to check their mood? How much do they party? Are you going to log into their Alexa to see whether they have a peaceful home environment or not? They would be very useful information for healthy living, for your advice, but are these ethical options? Who do you share this data with, whatever you are collecting? And how do you design a consent form for the user to understand what they are sharing, with whom they are sharing, and what are they getting out of it? What are they receiving in return? And of course, other connected questions to these, right? Like, are there safeguards for insurance companies not to later punish the user for not taking the advice from the AI health coach? So there are also connected questions within the domain you're operating in. If it is healthcare, you will have all the healthcare-related questions that's there. So these are complex questions, and these are not questions that just simple regulations, well, simple, just regulations, general regulations, even if they are not simple, can address. And they are internal questions. So like, it shouldn't be answered by external bodies, but they should be answered internally. And we do seem to have going to that direction of this internal integration of ethics into the process for building AI systems by these AI principles that are proposed by the companies and the AI ethics boards within the companies. So this is actually an oversight and compliance model, the principles and the boards. And we have this model for the last 40 years from research ethics. So this is not a new model at all. You have the research ethics boards. Those of you who are doing research in academia, you are familiar with it. Institutional review boards, IRBs, or research ethics committees in the Europe, RECs. And they use principles to evaluate research. And they are still trying to apply these general principles. There are just 4 principles, actually, that they are trying to apply. And the problem with this approach is that if you realize it's still not really integrating. It's within the company, but it is still a board that is sitting distant from the developers or the project teams, and that has this also at like a hierarchical level that approves your research or does not approve your research. So it's not exactly an integration we are talking about. And also, most of the time, these boards either don't have the right expertise, both for the science of whatever you're doing and the ethics of whatever you're doing, and they certainly don't have enough time, even if they have the expertise, because if you imagine all these questions being posed by every single project team, we are talking about a lot of questions. So we are, in one sense, we are still talking about enforcement of ethics with these boards and principles. It's just a different level of enforcement. It doesn't come from the regulatory level, like the external level. It's within the company, but it's still enforcing ethics. And it seems to, this whole enforcing ethics, while it's important, while it's important if it's crafted well, let's put it that way, seems to miss the main question, which is how do you solve ethical problems as you are developing AI systems? So, in other words, how should we really integrate ethics into building and developing AI systems? Not enforcing, but integrating it. So before I get to that, though, I think I should talk about why should we care about this. Because, so I'm a philosopher, as Javier said, and we have a very large literature. We are not fooling ourselves. We have a very large literature about how ethical reasoning is great, but it doesn't motivate people to do the right thing. So I'm going to try to give you a couple more motivations. If you're already motivated because it's the right thing, that's great. But if you're not, as a company or as a developer, as the practitioners basically, when you're not endorsing ethics, basically you are taking a risk. And it's quite a high-stake risk, because what you're doing is that every time something goes wrong, every time there's a scandal, basically you are giving the impression that you are the wild ones that the society has to control, which means heavy regulations are going to come to your way, and which also means if the scandals keep coming, they're going to come really fast. So these regulations will not even be good regulations, which is terrible for everyone because it's bad for the businesses, there won't be enough space for innovation, and it's bad for the society because innovation helps things. As long as the innovation is responsible, it's a good thing. We want to have the innovation going on. So this is at least one more reason why you should care. So then how do we integrate ethics? So if we want to solve ethical questions, then we have to think of them not just like policing ethics, but we need to think of them as like puzzle solving. Of course, ethical questions are not this simple, so they are like this. There's like very complex moving parts at all times that you have to deal with about individual well-being, individual autonomy, societal well-being, social justice, harm, but you have to consider them. And you have to consider them at each stage, as I said, from the beginning. Research, development, design, deployment, updating, all of these have unique ethical questions. So what's the model? One thing that we need to do is to catch these ethical problems from the very beginning, as soon as we can, before they become bigger problems. And if possible, just eliminate them. And for that, we need the people who are actually building AI systems, the developers and the researchers, to be aware of the relevant ethical issues and to have some sort of tool to deal with these ethical issues. So if these questions are not very complex, then we can do that by training the developers and the researchers, basically add another tool for their toolbox to deal with these ethical issues. By deal with them, I mean either, if it is, as I said, simple, solve them. If not, flag them. Just flag them and demand solutions for them. The second aspect is when the question is really complex. Obviously, we don't want to spend all the energy of people whose task is to build these tools to dive into the deep philosophical literature. But there is a deep philosophical literature, and applied ethics has been around for a very long time. So we have a lot of knowledge around applied ethics and using ethical problem solving in practice. We've been using it in medicine, in public health, in environmental questions. In businesses, we've been using applied ethics, so it's not like we are not reinventing the wheel here. So what you can do is to analyze the project. If it is a complex project, then you analyze the domain. If it is in healthcare, again, think about the AI health coaches that I just mentioned. Well, you have to understand the ethical questions around healthcare system, and you have to understand the questions around variables, the technology itself. And you need to figure out a set of right answers. Yes, a lot of the times, there is no single right answer. When the question is complex enough, we won't have a single right answer, but we can eliminate it to a couple of right answers. And that, if you could just choose from that set of right answers, you're really, really good. We are so much better off. And finally, certain complex questions will keep appearing over and over again. And for that, we don't want to rediscover the whole thing again. We don't want to do analysis again from the very beginning. What we want to do is slowly set a strategy for the company or the institution. So basically, figure out, those 80 sets of principles. Well, figure out what they really want to say. What do these companies want to say with those principles? A lot of the times, principles will say things that are very charming, like be socially beneficial and protect individual autonomy and privacy, and you will realize that, well, they clash a lot of the times. That's what a complex ethical question is. They clash. So how are you going to deal with them? As a company, what is your agenda? What is your strategy? Ethical strategy. And so operationalizing these principles, putting processes around them, and setting precedents. what did you decide last time you had a similar question? And how are you going to use that knowledge now with this next question on the table? So these 3 steps, where are we actually doing this? Where can we do these? Well, obviously in the companies. So any company that has some resources to devote to ethical analyses can look into these, integrating these into their into the processes in building AI systems. The other one is incubators and accelerators. Startups are usually quite concerned about the ethical aspects of the products that they are building, but they don't have the resources, and that's very understandable. So the incubators that they are located in and the accelerators that they are located in are the right places where these services, these information can be offered them. And finally, the research centers. So academic institutions are as lost as the private companies. So you still need these steps to be integrated into the research and development process within the academic centers, within the research institutions. And the demand for this should come from companies and startups who understand that, well, hopefully who understand that ethics matters, but if not, that business risk matters. Developers who care about really just developing good technology, because when your technology is making huge ethical mistakes, usually they're also wrong. If you're trying to have the best algorithm for hiring decisions, and you, because of biases, you discard a whole bunch of women, your algorithm is actually not getting the right people. So it is an enhancement of the technology if you get the ethics right. And as developers, my sense is we care about this. And investors who are investing into these companies, because they are also taking a risk, business risk. So basically, what we need to be doing is moving from this, this model of ethics as policing, which puts off a lot of the practitioners, as well as, trust me, a lot of the philosophers, but really go into puzzle solving, and to do that using the knowledge that comes from ethics together with the knowledge that comes from AI, and hence the AI ethics. That's all. Thank you.
All right, so now, all right, now we'll take 3 questions from the audience. If there's anyone who wants to ask a question, Cansu, now is your time. We have one over here. Sorry, 1 second. Behind.
Over there.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So you talked about startups and how they can, the incubators are a great place for them to access information about ethics and how to integrate it. I've worked with quite a lot of startup founders who want to, they've spotted a gap, or they've seen something that can be fixed, and often there's an ethical reason for that. Mm-hmm. But what happens when investment starts coming in? So I think in my experience, it often becomes more difficult for startup founders to kind of keep hold of that those original values once investment comes in.
Yeah. Basically, you're right, and what you're pointing to is that as soon as there are parties involved that don't care about the ethics of whatever you're doing, there is a tension, and then you have to make the decision, well, I really want to get this startup going, should I just this once not do this? The good thing is that the investors care more and more, in my experience. This was, again, an absolutely not talked about topic just 2 years ago when you talk to investors, and now they do care a lot of the times, especially when investing into the startups, because they don't yet have the commitment, right? Like, they can now think about it. And hopefully, getting them care is how you can. And if it is not, you're really looking at the ethics versus the market pull, which is the problem, but it is also, as the culture is slowly changing, it is also a problem that there is hope that it can align somehow.
We have a question back there.
Mm-hmm.
We have a mic coming around right now.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Fanny. Thank you very much for the presentation. I would like to ask you to give me one example to apply all that model and your presentation to an ethical problem. And if you could tell me a little bit about how to distinguish your solution with ethics as opposed to a legal solution to that problem. Thank you.
Sure. So I can give you the example that I just gave so to keep it short, that I gave in the talk. Building AI health coaches. The questions are, so legally speaking, consent form for AI, something like that, is very non-functional, dysfunctional. You basically have terms and services. You scroll through, you accept everyone knows you're not reading it. And it's not a big legal issue. There is a debate, but there is no enforcement of it. It is an ethical issue, and we are all aware of that. So one way that it diverges is, like, ethically speaking, terms and conditions mean absolutely nothing if we know that you're not reading it. Because what it should mean is informed consent. You know, there is a reason why we call it informed consent, and there is no information provided. The information is not provided in the way that a person will have the time to read, will have the energy to read, and it's updated all the time. So everything around that, for example, is a major ethical problem. It's not yet a legal problem. The good thing about ethics and legal to often aligning is that when the conversation starts somewhere, usually in ethics, that informs the rules, regulations, luckily, so that they start there is a good feedback loop between the two. Something that you kept saying as again, going back to another field, just medical healthcare, something that was a problem, the informed consent, just ethically speaking, became a legal rule. You have to have this implemented and implemented properly at this point. So I would say this is one like really simple example where it changes. And how it would happen, well, you know, the whole consent structure around this particular product has to be designed while you're designing before you basically push it out.
We have time for one more question in case there was somebody who wants to. We have one question right here. There's a mic right behind you.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I think the integration point is a really, really powerful one. And I'm curious if you've seen examples of this, especially, and ones that are really functional, because from what I've observed, engineers by training don't have necessarily all of the domain knowledge necessary to do that puzzle solving.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, and so how do you bring the other relevant experts to the table? And have you seen that working, and how did that come to be? Because it doesn't seem to me to be the way that most tech companies are structured today.
You're absolutely right. Basically, everything right now is still in the experimental phase. So we went from like zero concern to real concern, and now there is experimenting. Like all the companies are experimenting with different models of integration. And as I said, the compliance and oversight model is sort of taking hold of the situation, but companies are also doing seminars and trainings. They are having boards that are more functional. By the way, I think, yes, very important point you make is that, no, I don't expect engineers to now ditch engineering, go into philosophy, solve all the ethical problems, because, I mean, there's a division of labor, right? So philosophers are the ones who deal with the ethical questions. And if you need like a field information, well, sociology people should be the ones that you should go for. So we have the right training already, and we have these trainings come together in different fields where we decided to care about ethics already. So again, I talk about the healthcare example a lot because healthcare is an area where we managed to get ethics really integrated. Not perfect, but the best that we have. And there you do have philosophers collaborate with public health people to decide, you know, how to set the guidelines, how to set the agendas. And in particular cases, you know, in a hospital, what are you going to do about this particular case? You don't tell the surgeon, okay, now take 3 days off, figure everything out yourself. No, because that would be a waste of the surgeon's time in this particular question, whereas you have people who are actually skilled in this.
Nice. All right, well, that's it. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for the great talk. See you soon.